And we're going to go past some of this. This starts getting into some of the really interesting nesting relationships that tie these forms together, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this today because this is actually the kind of stuff that we cover in a more in-depth class. And in order to make sense out of it, this is the kind of drawing exercises that we would do in a sacred geometry class to begin to understand the nesting relationships of these particular geometric forms. Okay, so now we're going to talk about time measures. The first thing we're going to look at is astrological time cycles. I don't know how many of you have studied astrology, but in this particular scheme of time, the total duration of the precessional cycle, which is 25,920 years, this is the motion of the Earth on its axis like this, or you could think of it like this. The axis of the Earth actually forms sort of an hourglass motion, a long, slow period of rotation. You could consider Earth's third motion, next to its first motion, which is the daily rotation of the Earth on its axis, its second motion, which is the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and its third motion, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. The diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis gives us the day-night cycle, which is obviously of critical importance to our life down here on Earth. The orbit around the Sun also is likewise of critical importance because that's the yearly cycle. The third motion is what the ancients referred to as the Great Year. And it's been measured by astronomers at slightly over 50 seconds of arc of motion per year, which actually puts the astronomically determined number slightly less than this one. But we don't know that that's necessarily constant for the whole cycle. In any case, the ancient number that was typically attributed to this great year cycle was 25,920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our annual year. And just as the annual year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall, likewise the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years, which is interesting because 6,480 years, as you recall, was the total measure of the dodecahedron. So here we have this same number linking the measure of space in terms of the dodecahedron, 6,480 degrees, and the season of the great year, which was considered to be profoundly important to ancient cultures all over the world, who had various ways of representing this 4-fold division of cyclical time. All right, then we have, from the ancient Chaldeans, we have what was known as the Saros cycle, which was 3,600 years. So we see a repetition of that number. The 3,600, if you recalling and are taking notes, is the number of degrees measuring the icosahedron. Then we have the decans. You'll notice that a Platonic month, which is 1/12 of the great year, right there. You divide that number by 12, you get this number, 2,160. And that number, you may recall, depending on how good your memory is the number of degrees measuring the cube, 2,160. And then you'll notice the 2 decans of the ecliptic, or 20 degrees of the ecliptic, is 1,440, the number of degrees in the octahedron. And 1 decan, or 10 degrees, for any of you who've studied astrology, you know that the decans are important to astrological determinations. 1 decan of 10 degrees then takes 720 years. And so here we have all 5 of the Platonic solids represented in these particular time cycles. And over here, I'm going to mention that ancient cultures all over the world used to run 2 calendars successively. A secular calendar, which is typically like our modern calendar of 365 and 1/4 days, and then they would have a sacred calendar of 360 days, and 5 days intercalated, they would call it. And typically, they would do, whether it was the Greeks or the Egyptians or even the Mayans, ancient cultures all over the world had similar traditions of setting those 5 days aside, and they were considered to be unlucky. And so really no work, no activity, nothing. Nobody ever tried to do anything on those days. They would just take those days off. 5 days off, and then they would resume again and pick up their sacred year of 360 degrees. Now the Sumerians had a belief that the year was once actually 360 days in length, and that somewhere along, as a result of some cosmic catastrophe of some undefined sort, the year was lengthened by 5 1/4 days. And so the Sumerians, who are the first known culture to mathematically divide the circle into 360 degrees, it is believed that one of their motives for doing so was they believed that that circle then could become a model of the year, and each degree then representing one day. So what we have now is a synchrony going on, in that if the year, the idealized or sacred year, is 360 days, then what we have, if you actually picture it, is that the Earth is describing a circle in its orbit, but then in each degree of motion around that circle, it's turned once on its axis. So what we have there is a synchronization of this cosmic motion representing these numbers. So in any case, the ancient cultures would reckon time measure by 360 days according to the sacred calendar. And by doing so, they could then divide that 360 days of the sacred year into subdivisions such as this right over here. And we'll just run through that very quickly. You'll notice that one deccan turns out to be 10 days within the sacred calendar, and that's exactly 14,400 minutes. So here we have the same numbers recurring again. You'll notice, though, that the symbolism of the number is not lost, or the system of the symbolism of the number is consistent irrespective of its order of magnitude. So in other words, you could say the square of 12 being 144 has the same symbolism as 144 times 10, or 144 times 100, as you have right here, or even 144 times 1,000. Again, referring back to the book of Revelations, there's a verse in there referring to the 144,000 redeemed of the earth. And we'll get to that here shortly. That's an interesting quote, because they have various ways of embedding these sacred numbers into the various traditions. You'll notice that 3 decans, or 1 Platonic month, in the Platonic year was 2,160 years, but in the sacred year of 360 days, again, there's that 43,200. So, and go down here, the 1 Platonic season of 6,480 years, 129,600. So if you're taking notes and writing these down, you're going to find that you're writing down the same numbers over and over again, simply raised to different orders of magnitude. Okay. This is just a little graphic that depicts this precessional motion that I'm talking about here, this motion right here, that is generally assumed by most astronomers to be primarily induced onto the Earth by the moon, secondarily by the sun, and then also a contributing factor by the planets. So it's almost, you could almost think of this precessional motion of the Earth's axis as being the vectoral summation of all the gravity forces of the solar system acting on the Earth, causing it acting. See, when the planet rotates on its axis, and this is a critical factor, as it rotates on its axis, it spreads out towards the middle. Its equatorial diameter is greater than its polar diameter. And that, in fact, is critical to the Earth maintaining axial stability, so that it's not doing this in its orbit around the sun. Because if it was doing that, it's likely that higher life would have never evolved in the first place. But due to the fact that it spins, it spreads out so that the diameter of the equator is 26 miles greater than the diameter of the pole. The sum total of all the gravity forces impinging upon the Earth from moon, sun, and planets acts upon that bulge as if it was a flywheel, and is actually pulling it around, pulling it around. And it's that leads to the great year. And what it does is over a period of half the great year, 1 million or 12,960 years, is it reverses the seasons. So that if we were able to jump in a time machine and go back 12,960 or ahead 12,960, we would find that everything was reversed. If we would keep the same Gregorian calendar in place, the seasons would have been reversed, so that winter would be July and summer would be, in fact, and then what we would see is that hemispherically, like we know that when it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's summer in the southern hemisphere. Well, those seasons would be reversed. They flip. It's a back and forth. It's an oscillation between the two hemispheres of the Earth over a period of 12,960 years. This shows the wheel of the great year with all of the ages, the astrological months as they're known. And if we were to place ourselves right at this position right here where it says 0 years BP, BP means before present, and it also is 25,920 years. So what has been happening is that the vernal equinox, a hypothetical point in space occupied by the sun, when day and night are the exact same duration, that vernal point is moving through space as a result of this axial motion of the Earth. And ancient peoples would go to great lengths to try to observe and predict that motion. So they would set up structures, oftentimes on a very large scale, that would be oriented to certain points in space so that one could, from certain vantage points, such as the center of a ringed megalithic structure, for example, or the center of a temple that had an axial orientation to a certain point on the horizon, one could make minute observations of this slowly shifting vernal equinox, or, for example, the solstices. The vernal equinox and the solstices are two lines in space that are at right angles to each other. I'll show you a graphic in a minute. But in any case, as we go around this wheel, this great wheel here, this wheel of this cosmic wheel, what we're going to see is that each of these is a zodiacal sign. We have here Pisces, we have here Aquarius. So now the vernal equinox is poised. It's moving out of the star constellation of Pisces, moving into the star constellation of Aquarius. And so we say that roughly for the last 2,000, or if we want to be precise, 2,160 years, the vernal equinox has been transiting the constellation of Pisces, and therefore we've been in the Piscean age. Prior to that was Aries, prior to that was Taurus. We find that the beginning of modern recorded history goes back to the Taurian age. We can essentially express all of recorded human history between the latter part of the Taurian age through the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, and now into the age of Aquarius, right? Okay, if we go back, we'll notice though that the numbers here are the same numbers, the same family of numbers we've been looking at here. 2160, 4320, 6480, 8640, 10,800. We saw the number 108. I called your attention to that when I was asking you what was the atomic weight of silver and which metal, which astronomical object is silver associated with? The moon, yes. 12,960 puts us exactly on the opposite end of the equinoctial axis, and then we see at right angles to each other we have, this is the autumn-spring axis, and this is the summer-winter axis. And they're at right angles to each other, and the whole thing is rotating. You've got a picture that this propeller is rotating counterclockwise. So that in 6,480 years, Taurus will have moved down to the 0 point. Okay, we've seen this. So this is just a recap of those same numbers. And you will notice 8640, the number of seconds in one day. You'll notice that in a half a day, 43,200. Well, if you go back to the dawning of the age of Aries, 4,320 years ago. And these are just more interesting ways that these numbers show up. If you take 25,920 seconds and set each second corresponding to 1 year of the great year, you'll discover it's exactly 432 minutes. 25,920 hours in turn is 1,080 days. And 25,920 days is equal to 72 years in the sacred calendar, which is interesting because I think most determinations of the average human lifespan right now in history is about 72 years. So you could think of a human lifespan as being equivalent to 1 day of the great year. There's an interesting proportional relationship going on there between the total precessional cycle of 25,920 years and 1 human lifetime.